Senator Rodriguez, what purpose?
To ask the author some questions. Just
Do you yield?
one question. I was going to bring up the comptroller's fiscal note that Senator Menendez was pointing out is concerned about the impact that this legislation would have on the franchise tax. And the concern I have about that, so this is, I know you said you had 3 lawyers look at it and other people have looked at it. And I'm not going to belabor what's already been said by Senator West, Senator Menendez, and Nathan Johnson about their concern. But my concern is that if it does in fact end up impacting the franchise tax, margins tax as you refer to it, that's going to cut off funding for education. You're aware that if that happened, if it impacts the franchise tax that way, that we will lose funding for education?
Well, if I could address a couple of things, you're making very good, you're very you're asking some very good questions, and you have some, I think, legitimate concerns. So a few things are, because I did talk to the comptroller's office today, and as things sit now, let's just pretend HJR 38 never existed. Right now, legal decisions could impact the franchise tax today. It could, because interpretations, but in 13 years, only 2 lawsuits, went forward, and they didn't impact it because they were unsuccessful. But, so that fiscal note, when you read it, or that description, could be a little bit, eye-grabbing, but then consider that it says could. Any future legal decision could impact various and myriad of things, particularly the franchise tax, number one. Number two, this legislation, HJR 38, could increase our coffers in the amounts that are going in because it's going to stimulate and promote growth. There's a very good argument to be made that we're giving the business community more certainty to know that Texas is very serious about our low taxes, limited government, reasonable regulation state, that an income tax is absolutely not on the horizon because we don't have one now, but we're increasing the threshold. We're being proactive in an environment where, as Senator Menendez said, there wasn't a lot of appetite for it. That was his words, not mine. We're making that bar even higher and providing the people what they want.
Well, I know, and you've repeated several times that this would be an inducement for more businesses to come into the state. I think that's already happening because we already have the Bullock Amendment that pretty much makes it extremely difficult, if even possible, to impose an income tax in this state. And so on that would be my response to that issue on businesses coming in. But the other point I wanted to make, besides the comptroller's statement, you mentioned that, there's court decisions that could affect this down the line anyway. Well, that's the case with every piece of legislation that we pass through this legislature, through this body. So I'm not sure that that's a valid argument to make with regard to the possibility that this might take out the franchise tax, and all because, as the comptroller points out in the fiscal note, because your legislation uses the word individual instead of natural person, and that's already been amply debated, so I'm not going to get into that anymore. I'm just saying that the comptroller himself tied in the use of individual to the possibility that it might impact the franchise tax. Let me ask you one other question, and this is my last question.
Yes, sir.
Because I was listening to the debate, and at one point you said people don't want an income tax. Almost, and the way you said it almost implied that people will not change their mind on it. And that this bill is intended to ensure that we can never get an income tax in this state. And because people probably won't change their mind on it, because they overwhelmingly are opposed to it. I don't know how young you are. I think you look pretty young to me, but have you ever heard of...
I think youth is relative, though.
Have you ever heard of California's Proposition 13?
No, please tell me about it.
Well, that was a proposition that passed in California many years.
Is that about the 3%?
No. It was involving the property tax. And what Proposition 13 did, the voters voted for it, but it was promoted by individuals who were concerned about rising property taxes.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah.
Rising property taxes. I'm sure Senator Betancourt.
I'm somewhat familiar with that.
He's closer, so he knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, the voters passed Proposition 13, and what that ended up doing was limiting the increase in revenue growth out of the property tax. Now, only recently, only just a few years ago, finally, they repealed Proposition 13. Why? Because the people changed their mind, given that the state was really hurting for revenue and couldn't really fund a lot of the services that people wanted funded. And so I guess I'm trying to say, don't you think that even with the income tax, it's possible that down the line, people are going to be, even this session, we're dealing with trying to limit property taxes. And we even contemplated a sales tax. We're the only state that has only two tax revenue sources, the property tax and the income tax. And we're only, like you pointed out, one of 7 states that doesn't have an income tax. All the other states have an income tax, a 3-pronged stool to raise revenue. So I'm concerned that down the line, we will get to the point in this state, the way they did in California, that people are going to start looking more critically and seriously at an income tax in this state. But your bill would almost make it prohibitive that they would be able to do that. And that's the problem that I have with the bill, in addition to what the comptroller's concern is regarding the franchise tax.
Well, Senator, thank you very much. And as you just said, California passed something, but they also had a mechanism to reverse it, in which they did successfully, and there's nothing that changes here. I think we considered in the bottom line context of the fact that from 1845 to 1993, if I'm not mistaken, Texas is about 138 years, was 2/3 of both chambers to have an income tax. And then since 93 to today, 26 years, the Bullock Amendment changed that. All we're doing with this legislation is resetting it to where the Texas's natural state for over a century was that burden, and that's simply all that this does. And this could increase revenue as well. Could is subjective, but thank you very much for your question.
I think you've gotten plenty of robust debate on this one, Senator Fallon, but I, like the others, I feel this is going to be bad for the state as a matter of public policy, so I will be voting against it, unfortunately.
We still love you, and thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.